After Deborah and Barak, assisted by Yael, destroyed Jabin, the Canaanite king, they sang a song extolling God for the victory that he gave them. This is the second such song recorded in the Bible. The song represented a heightened awareness of God's presence and holiness, and thus a new beginning. When the children of Israel turned away from God after Deborah's death, it represented a greater fall from God's presence and a harsher response from God. The ArtScroll commentary on Judges contrasts the time immediately following their song of victory with Israel's turning away from God after Deborah's death. The oppression described in this chapter is worse than what had happened previously, which indicates that the sinfulness was more serious than that of the previous generation, since God punishes measure for measure. When Israel called out to God for deliverance, God sent a prophet and then a deliverer. He chose Gideon, the least son of the smallest clan of Manasseh, to deliver Israel. Now, what does God's choice of Gideon reveal about the situation in Israel and his power to save? I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is the Promise of Rest. God allowed the Midianites to attack and prevail against Israel for 7 years. The Midianites were a nomadic people and had no desire to rule over the land of Israel and its people. They chose to repeatedly raid, pillage, and burn cities and crops. The Israelites were forced out of their homes and into the mountains, where they dwelt in caves and built strongholds as refuges. Judges 6, 1-3. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made for themselves the dens, the caves, and the strongholds, which are in the mountains. So it was, whenever Israel had sown, Midianites would come up, also Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. Now, like the Midianites, the Amalekites were a nomadic people. The goal of their raids was not to rule over the land, but to destroy the land and the people. They wanted the land for their own cattle and flocks, so they would come up in masses, looting, burning, and destroying. Judges 6, verses 4-6. Then they would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents, come in as numerous as locusts. Both they and their camels were without number, and they would enter the land to destroy it. So Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Now imagine trying to plant a crop when every time you planted, the raiders came and burned it. Then, when you tried to harvest what little remained, the raiders came and burned that too. Israel was being destroyed. The harsh conditions were like those that they endured when they were in bondage in Egypt. The children of Israel called out to God. He didn't send a deliverer. He first sent a prophet to tell them why they were suffering under the hand of the Midianites. But Judges 6, 7-10. And it came to pass, when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord because of the Midianites, that the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel, who said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you, and gave you their land. Also I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice." The prophet reminded Israel that their God is Jehovah. The gods of the nations are not their gods. He reminded the Israelites that they were once in bondage in Egypt, and God brought them out, delivering them from the pharaohs who oppressed them. He reminded them that he gave them the land where they were in. The prophet mentions these two specific situations to intimate that the reason they were not delivered out of the hand of the Midianites was not because God lacked the ability, but it was because they did not obey the voice of God. The God they should fear is not the gods of the Amorites. They should fear Jehovah. 17th century theologian Matthew Henry expands on God's instructions not to fear the gods of the Amorites. Do not worship them for fear of their doing you any hurt. For what hurt can they do while I am God? Fear God, and you need not fear them. The Bible doesn't tell us how Israel responded to the rebuke of the prophets. However, as the account continues, we learn that the family of the Abiezrites were actively engaged in worshiping Baal and Asherah. In spite of this, the angel of the Lord sat down under the terebinth tree and spoke to a man of the household of Joash from the family of Abiezer, from the tribe of Manasseh. Judges 6:11-12. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon thrashed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." Gideon was working hard to provide for his family when the angel of the Lord appeared to him. Now further on in the chapter, we learn that Gideon had many servants he could have ordered to thresh the wheat, but yet he was the one putting his life at risk. God frequently chooses a person who is engaged in tending to his needs, or to the needs of others, to lead his people. Now, for example, Moses and David were tending their flocks, and Samuel was in service at the tabernacle. The angel of the Lord addressed Gideon as a mighty man of valor. On the surface, we question how Gideon could be seen as a man of valor or might. Although Gideon is hiding his actions from the Midianites by threshing wheat in the winepress, he is doing what is prudent and most likely to be successful. And as we mentioned, he didn't send his servants to accomplish the task. He placed his own life in danger to complete the task himself. Gideon responded to the angel's greeting by questioning why God allowed the Midianites to oppress them. He goes on to ask where God's miracles were that he had heard about. The angel answered by telling Gideon that deliverance was about to happen and that he was the one chosen to deliver Israel. Now notice that at this point in the dialogue, the narrative indicates that Jehovah speaks directly to Gideon. Judges 6, verse 14. Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in, this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" The Lord turned to Gideon. The word turned is the Hebrew word panah, meaning to turn or to face. The Lord faced Gideon and spoke to him. He told Gideon to go in the might that he had already demonstrated by bravely thrashing the wheat. The Lord said that he had already chosen and sent Gideon. When the children of Israel were in bondage in Egypt, God sent Moses to deliver them. When Yeshua came to his people, when they were under Roman rule, he said that his Father, God, sent him to bring deliverance. Gideon responded as many humble people do. He didn't believe that God would choose him for such an important task. Judges 6, verse 15. So he said to him, "O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." The word clan is the Hebrew word aleph, number 504, meaning family. However, it is the same as number 505, meaning 1,000. The word least is the Hebrew word tzair, meaning little, among, least, or youngest. Gideon was from the poor or weak 1,000 of the tribe of Manasseh, and he was the youngest son in his father's house. Gideon's objections echo those of Moses in Exodus 3:11, that he was not worthy to be chosen for the task that God had given him. Saul used almost the same words as Gideon when Samuel anointed him to be king over Israel in 1 Samuel 9:21. And Micah tells us that Messiah Yeshua was born in the smallest or least thousand of Judah. Micah 5, verse 2. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little, that is, Zanir, among thousands, Eleph, of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth and are from old and from everlasting. Bethlehem was the ancestral home of Yeshua's father Joseph. Micah said that Bethlehem, like Gideon's clan of the Abiezrites, was little among the clans of the thousands of Judah. Yeshua's father, Joseph, was poor. He could only afford the poor man's offering of 2 birds for Mary's purification after childbirth. Isaiah writes that when God restores the glory of his people, a small one, Zair, shall become a strong nation. Isaiah 60, verse 22. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in its time. God said in Deuteronomy 7:7-8, that he chose Israel, the least of the nations, because of his promise to their fathers. As the least of the tribe of Manasseh, but mighty in valor, the Lord reassures Gideon that he will be with him. He would continue to fulfill his promises given to their fathers. Judges 6, verse 16. And the Lord said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. The first word that the angel of the Lord spoke to Gideon in verse 12 were that Jehovah was with him. Now Jehovah repeats this promise in the first person, stating, I will be with you. The Lord promised that Gideon will strike the Midianites as one man. The word one is the Hebrew word echad, number 259, meaning united or one. This is the same word used to describe God as one in the Shema in Deuteronomy 6:4. Gideon and his forces would be as one with each other and with God as he goes to strike the Midianites. Yeshua prayed that his followers would be one with each other and with God in John 17:20 and 21, so that all the world would know that God sent him to bring deliverance. Gideon was beginning to recognize that something amazing was happening. He asked the angel of the Lord for a sign that he was really talking to him, and then asked the angel to wait while he prepared a meal for the angel, much like Abraham prepared a meal for his 3 visitors. Judges 6:18-19. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you. And he said, I will wait until you come back. So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. The meal Gideon prepared met all the requirements of a mincha offering to the Lord. In fact, the angel received the meal as a mincha offering. He told Gideon to place the meal on a specific rock. Judges 6:20 and 21. The angel of God said to him, Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. And the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. The angel used a staff that he held in his hand to touch the offering and bring fire out of the rock, demonstrating his power and authority to accept Gideon's offering. Gideon was convinced that the one speaking to him was the angel of the Lord. Later in the book of Judges, Samson's parents would bring a similar offering to the angel of the Lord. At that time, the angel would not just accept the offering, he would rise in the smoke of the offering. Both Gideon and Samson's parents were afraid that they would die because they saw God. Now, the Lord continued to speak to Gideon, reassuring him that he would not die. Look at Judges 6, 23 and 24. Then the Lord said to him, "Peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die." So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it is still in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. That night the Lord gave Gideon his first task. He was to destroy his father's altar to Baal, along with the wooden images of Asherah. Judges 6, 25 through 26. Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, "Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it. And build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down." As is often the case, the name of a person that God selects to bring a message or accomplish a task reveals additional depth of understanding. In this case, Gideon's name, number 1439, means a feller of trees, from the root word gadah, number 1438, meaning to fell a tree, to destroy anything, or to cut. God told Gideon, the feller of trees and destroyer of things, to destroy the altar of Baal and cut down the wooden image of Asherah. Now Gideon and 10 of his servants destroyed the altar and built a proper altar on the rock where Gideon brought his Mincha offering. God instructed the children of Israel how to build an altar of stone in Exodus 20:25. Gideon would have used unhewn stones placed upon the rock under the terebinth tree where the angel of the Lord appeared to him. Then Gideon destroyed the altar of Baal and used the wood of that altar as the fire on the stone altar of the Lord. He sacrificed his father's second bull as a burnt offering to God. Thus Gideon defeated Baal. Now this situation is very similar to the situation where Elijah challenged the priests of Baal. Elijah built an altar, placed the wood and the offering on the altar, and God sent fire to consume the offering. Both Elijah and Gideon's Mincha offerings were accepted by God with fire. The next morning, when the men of the city saw that Gideon had destroyed the altar of Baal, they wanted to kill him. But Gideon's father, Joash, defended Gideon by declaring that if Baal was really a god, he could avenge himself. Now this takes us back to God's statement that Israel should not fear the gods of the Amorites. Judges 6, 31 and 32. But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down." Therefore, on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, "Let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar." Joash gave Gideon a second name, Jerubbaal. The NKJV Study Bible comments on Joash giving Gideon the name Jerubbaal. Gideon's father called him Jerubbaal to deride those who would put their trust in Baal. The name means "let Baal plead," and it echoes the question of verse 31. Thus Gideon became a living reminder of Baal's impotence. Now after Gideon's victory over Baal, Gideon's clan and tribe were ready to follow him to defeat the Midianites. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and others from the east crossed over the Jordan River and camped in the Jezreel Valley, the site of many of the battles in Israel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon. Judges 6:34 and 35. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. Now this was something bigger than Gideon had ever done. He was probably overwhelmed at the task that he was to accomplish. He had gathered a force of 32,000 men, but the Midianite force was over 4 times as large. He wanted to know if God was really going with him, and he asked God for a sign on the threshing floor. Judges 6:36 and 37. So Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." The next day, Gideon reversed the test. Although this ritual was not the proper way to inquire of God, Gideon should have inquired through the Urim and Thummim of the high priest. God answered Gideon by first allowing the dew to fall only on the fleece, and then allowing the dew to fall only on the ground. The forces were gathered for battle in the Jezreel Valley. God had chosen Gideon from the smallest and weakest 1,000 of Manasseh. He had chosen a man who was already willing to risk his life for his household. He chose Gideon, the feller of trees and the destroyer of things, to destroy the altar of Baal. Baal was the god of the Midianites, through which they had caused Israel to sin on the plains of Moab just before the children of Israel entered the land. Now, by destroying the altar of Baal, Gideon issued the challenge to fight. Jerubbaal, let Baal contend, was ready to contend against the forces of Midian and their god Baal. Yeshua, who was born in the least city of the thousands of Judah, gave his life to save all those who would call on his name. He will come, blow the shofar of God, and gather his forces to fight all the nations and their gods who gather to try to destroy God's nation and his people. I'm Dan Cathcart from Moed Ministries International. Shalom, and be blessed.